Good day, everyone. Richard Cowperthwait for Northwest Access TV. Thanks for joining us for another show, and very happy to have on board today Dominic Cloud, the St. Albans City Manager. And Dominic, I mentioned this briefly on air. I just want to tell folks, in case our regular viewers, and I hope there are a lot of you out there, are wondering, gee, Richard, you interview the mayor of St. Albans all the time. We never see the city manager. Totally on me. And Dominic, for as long as you hang in, hopefully a bunch more years around here. Hope to have you on regular.
You.
So again,
good
totally on me, but good to see you.
Thank you.
And speaking of, veteran, long time, you got to be up there in the ranks of the most veteran city managers, town managers in Vermont, I got to think.
I'm getting there.
How many years?
15.
I would have guessed 15.
Yeah, 15.
Wow.
So, which isn't the longest in terms of
I
total
guess Bill
tenure.
Chuff, I'm thinking Bill Chuff was maybe around 20 or so.
Yeah, I think he was 20. Yeah.
But boy, 15, that's a lot of years.
Yeah. My dad always said we shouldn't give awards to people for length of service. Do your thing and move on, right? And so I always thought that would be, but every time we get done with one project, it's time to do something else.
In fact, it reminds me of what one city official said about you. Hey, love having Dominic still around here. Without projects, he would have been gone a long time ago, and you wouldn't disagree with that kind of
I agree.
a project guy.
Yeah, I like to make things happen. So.
Interesting. Well, you certainly had that legacy, I would say.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, you came from what, Vermont League of Cities and Towns? Is that where you were working before you got this job?
Yeah.
Interesting.
7 years there, and
wow.
Doing a lot of training and educating and consulting, and which was great.
Had you been thinking about, I wouldn't mind being a town manager, city manager at that point, at some point?
Yeah, I was spent some time as a lobbyist for the league, and then I spent some time doing training and consulting. And I had gotten tired of watching other people do things.
Interesting.
And it was time to do something myself.
Huh, interesting. I suspect when you started this job, it wouldn't have crossed your mind that you would have been here this long, or maybe you're not. What was it like a 3-year contract to start out with, or not even that?
It was a 3-year contract, and and I had in my mind, let's do 5 to 7. I think is what I told him at the interview, and
that's probably is that average, or even a little more than average?
That's about it depends on if you're measuring in state or nationally. That's about average. You know, like 3 is kind of the minimum. 5's probably the average, right? And but what I would say is what keeps me, first and foremost, it's the council's pleasure, right? I serve for them. And secondly, we mentioned the projects, but probably even more important than that is there's a great relationship between the city council and the staff, and the city council works hard at consensus, and they are very mindful of things that the elected officials can do that staff can't do, and vice versa. And
so that's always worked out pretty
that
well.
Relationship, yeah.
And pretty stable city staff over the years.
Yeah, it's been really stable, and
how many city employees are we talking?
About 75 total.
Really? Wow.
There's I haven't added it up in a bit, but within City Hall, there's probably around 10, but the largest department, of course, is the police department.
And speaking of police, I suppose that's not a bad place to start. The historic agreement, and I've said a bunch of times, I think there's nothing overstated about calling that the historic agreement between the city and town, covering, of course, the ever-thorny water, wastewater issues and police.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that. I guess my question is, why? Again, I mentioned I'd love to know the dollars spent by the city and town on litigation, or maybe I don't want to know that. I mean, I wonder if it's almost 7 figures even, but
it's
I guess
not 7.
Why? I mean, I'm sure you would have loved to have seen that happen. Why did that take so long? I'm so glad it happened, but boy, a long time coming.
Disputes have a life cycle of their own.
Yeah.
And the litigation was inefficient, but it had to happen on some level because it was unknown where the guardrails were, right? And so, why did it take so long to get to this point? Well, neither party was convinced of where the guardrails were on how to put together a deal, right? And then, it wasn't until, 10 years into it for me and 100 years into it for others that we realized, let's link police and water and sewer, I don't think it's ever been done anywhere in the country.
Oh, I didn't even think about that aspect.
We created it out of whole cloth.
Really?
And it was a solution that couldn't be imposed by a judge or a mediator.
Yeah.
It was only something that grew out of the mutual will of the parties. The litigation, I think of it as a necessary evil, and where we are now, it's a landmark agreement that's, sets us up for the future.
Yeah, I should know we're taping this show on, make sure I have the right date here, Friday, May 24th. Anyway, so speaking of the historic agreement, of course, just kind of a little over a month away from that really kicking in.
Yeah.
With the affiliation fee being gonzo as of July 1st.
Yes.
And of course, St. Albans PD starting to cover St. Albans town again. I guess the key issue there is staffing. How has City PD, have they got the staffing they need to deal with the town again?
Yeah. They've been ramping up pretty much since day one.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I think the agreement was a good idea and will be successful is recruitment is easier when you get to a certain size. You got to, management 101, you got to right size it, right? And so we're big enough to have career offerings and professional development, but small enough to still be nimble and to, not, the problem the state police have in very large departments, Burlington is it's a mammoth ask, right? We're small enough is that it's a more reasonable ask, right? So
how many uniform officers? We're talking about 20 or so, or a little more, or
16 patrol.
16 on patrol
total, and then we're also recruiting for 2 private investigators to do the drug work, and so
the street crimes unit will be coming back.
Street crimes unit is authorized as of July 1st, and we're in the process of recruiting for that as well. So that's a different pool that you're fishing in. You're more looking for, experienced officers that have a background in investigation and drug work. Whereas the patrol officers, most of the time we are finding them and training them, putting them through the academy. So that's the challenge. Is it's from contract signage. Yeah, this is a go, to sitting in the patrol car doing something. It can't be done in less than 12 months. And so,
long time,
right? Yeah.
And it's not like there are a ton of young people, unfortunately, clamoring to be police officers these days.
Yeah. And that, and then you got to hold them for that 12 months. And during that 12 months, you got to fend off the other departments who are trying to swoop in and offer a signing bonus.
And that certainly I guess it's probably happened to a lot of departments. That was happening to St. Albans PD, especially a while back. I remember when you definitely kicked up salaries to try to combat that kind of pretty competitive pay for around here.
Yeah, we're really competitive with pay. We're really competitive with benefits. That's where the right sizing comes in. You need to be big enough that you can offer comparable pay and benefits. Otherwise, you're just going to be a training ground for larger departments.
Right. So staffing. So you're prepared for July 1st. Are you going to be okay?
We're prepared for July 1st. What we're seeing is not so much the demands caused by the expansion of the territory. but just the intensity of policing right now, with what's going on in the country and in society, and the general lawlessness that most folks seem to point back to COVID and the way we came out of it. But our officers are just literally running from one call to the next.
Is that right? Wow.
And so that's why it's so hard to do the drug work. Is proactive. We get calls all the time. Can't you do something about that drug house, right? Look, here's a video of 20 people walking in and out during 15 minutes.
Wow.
And no, you can't, because when you take that to a judge, the judge will say, how do you know they aren't selling baseball cards?
Yeah.
We don't. It's not probable cause, right? And so, the challenge in drug work is you got to get a buy-in. It's all undercover work. You got to get a buy-in into that house.
Yeah. So you mentioned lawlessness. Does it just seem, again, you've been here 15 years doing your thing. Is it just from a police point of view, just a much tougher situation now than it was 15 years ago, or different, or?
It's a couple of talking points there. One is it's a lot better in St. Albans than it is in our peer cities.
Yeah.
And so we tend to lose track of that. I have reason to spend time in in various cities around the state. And what strikes me all the time is how much less the population of folks who are in transition, who are seeking housing and having trouble meeting their daily needs. That's much smaller in St. Albans than it is in comparable cities.
Really?
That said, we are seeing an increase. Part of what happened in Vermont is, in our efforts to provide around COVID, in our efforts to provide a social safety net and be both compassionate and public health minded, we created an incentive for folks from other states to migrate into Vermont, where we were taking better care than other states, right, of our vulnerable populations. And so that interacts with our hostility toward development and housing to create this problem. And so the police department is they're right on the bow of the ship of dealing with navigating between operating as a 21st century police department, which is operates more on compassion and relationships than force. At the same time, responding to a public which is increasingly saying we need to swing the pendulum back a little bit. The lawlessness, the drug dealing, the number of people who are begging on our street, this is changing our sense of place.
Yeah. Boy, sounds like a lot of tough issues.
And so that's a tough place to be as an officer, right? And so, they do a great work, great job at it. I give them, all kinds of credit, but some of the things I hear them saying when I'm out on them with a call or when I have cause to watch a video is, everybody has a right to feel safe. We work for everybody, and the cops have really got that message loud and clear that it's public safety for all. And if anything, the police now maybe tend towards protecting the rights of the unhoused and the disenfranchised, et cetera.
Speaking of which, I did the walk last Saturday, the In Their Shoes.
How was that?
Focusing on, it was good. Just we checked, stopped by about six, 7, 8 different social service agencies. Mm-hmm. But it was useful talking to folks like Paul Dragon, the CV OEO chief, and all the folks around here in key jobs. So that was useful to me. But I mean, St. Albans, we're talking some unhoused folks, even in the city, I guess.
Absolutely. And
Boy, and are they being pretty much left alone, or what's the thinking with these folks?
To the extent that they can be left alone,
Yeah,
they are. For decades now, the city, not as the civic, the community, not necessarily the governing body, the community has said, we want to have a soup kitchen, we want to have a homeless shelter.
yeah,
We want to have social service agencies that provide emergency food and emergency clothing.
yeah. And that's all that's happened.
All of that, so we provide all of that right in the heart of the downtown.
Yeah,
And so that also means that folks who need those things like to
Yeah.
be in close proximity to it, right? So, and then some people complain and say, well, we have a lot of folks who are around waiting to get into the soup kitchen. That ship sailed decades ago, right?
Yeah.
And so we do from time to time address particular sites that have gotten out of control. And when that happens, it's not driven by the police department. It's rarely driven by the landowner.
Yeah.
It's driven by the neighborhood, right? And as we look through a lens of an equity lens and a justice lens, some of those neighborhoods are saying, we're tired of putting up with the drug dealers
Yeah.
living across the street from us.
Yeah.
And there's an environmental justice issue there as well, right?
Yeah.
So,
Rough number of unhoused homeless people in the city.
yeah, I hear 30 sometimes,
Really?
and it waxes and wanes, and there's others who are closer to that than I am. The place, what strikes me oftentimes is some of these folks are unhoused, but a lot of the sites where we've been asked to intervene aren't really housing sites. They're illicit marketplaces. They're where people are dealing drugs.
Yeah.
I was at a site the other day, and there, 20 people in an hour walked in and out.
Really?
Analogous to the aforementioned house, right?
20 people.
20 people, right? And so, if there's anything that we're disturbing, it's more a market than it is a house
Yeah.
or a home.
Yeah. Well,
So-
the state, of course, has been struggling with this issue big time.
Yeah,
It's and of course, Vermont. I keep reading Vermont second highest, number of homeless people per capita in the country after just California.
yeah. We have the highest of everything per
Yeah.
capita because we have no capita,
Yeah.
right? So, we also have the highest brew pubs per capita because
Yeah.
for the same reason,
Yeah.
right? So.
Huh.
We have to take all those statistics with a grain of
Sure,
salt,
so.
right? And so, I think qualitatively, we have to ask ourselves, how does it feel in Vermont versus other places? And I
Yeah.
think, qualitatively, Vermont is still one of the safest places in the country.
Yeah. I certainly had that impression for what that's worth. I certainly hope that's the case. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, and the data, that data, because of the size of the denominator,
Yeah.
can skew it. But I think as I was listening, we were talking earlier about road trips, and I've gotten fond of podcasts. I was listening to an Ezra Klein podcast the other day, who was talking about. He had Obama's drug expert on it, and he was talking all about the heading, I think, is "What a Strange Time It Is in the War on Drugs," and his analysis is, and I think it's relevant to the discussion in Vermont, is conventional wisdom is housing first, and then then we focus on treatment. When I interact with all the folks who are unhoused, their core issue is addiction.
Yeah.
It's, and they're barred from accessing many of the social services that we have because they're in the throes of addiction, right?
So treatment jumps out as the biggest issue.
Treatment, and the other thing that emerges from this podcast is the importance of some coercive element forcing people to get treatment, right? There was a CAX did a story the other day about somebody who had hit rock bottom in our community with addiction, and what got him into treatment was law enforcement, right? And so, I think we need an all hands on deck approach to addressing the lawlessness, the quality of life in our communities, right? What we haven't talked about yet that's even more vexing is the challenges that the police department has with enforcement in the judiciary, right? And so,
in fact, I recently had Jim Hughes and former Judge Greg Rainville on the show.
Yeah,
getting into a lot of issues.
I'd be interested to watch that.
Yeah, Greg's a friend of mine, but too one of the judges who wasn't afraid to throw out some bail once in a while, which seems to be almost a four-letter word these days.
Yeah, as I understand it, in the wake of 2020 and the George Floyd incident, Vermont reformed its bail statute, and that has placed our judges, constricted them in their ability to use bail as a coercive measure. And there's some things that passed in the legislature that are going to help, but.
And New York's had the same. I hear that issue in New York. I guess they did a bail reform that's now coming under increasing attack again.
Really? Yeah.
I think so.
I mean, there has to be a standard. We can't have a world where we say to our young people, it's okay to use drugs. It's okay to steal.
Yeah.
When the police arrest you, nothing will happen.
Yeah.
And the public is beginning to turn. There's
and shoplifting, of course, comes right to mind with what we're talking about.
And the shoplifting is what the shoplifting that occurs is really part of the addiction system, right? It's not like when many of us were kids and we, might have had a friend who stole a candy bar for sport and entertainment,
or something,
right? The people that are shoplifting today take orders at that illicit marketplace, go to Ace Hardware, steal something that is
less than $900.
Less than exactly. Yeah.
No, it sounds like it's just crazy.
It's
I think the legislature was dealing with that a little bit, and I've lost track of what passed and didn't pass, but it didn't sound like they were making a big dent with that. Takes $900 to kick it to a felony.
Yeah.
That seems unbelievable.
I think the bill, and legislators could correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
I think the bill was to allowing some aggregation of offenses.
Yeah,
right?
that sounds right. Yeah, if there was quick
and
repeat offenses.
The folks that we're dealing with are, literally getting out in one day and reoffending 3 times.
Yeah. And I wake up to the good folks at WVMT every morning, and I can just count on Kurt Wright and Anthony just getting into, just see these unbelievable cases. Joe Blow being, picked up for the, 500th time and released on conditions. I mean, it's just, some of this stuff is just, you wonder why people get so discouraged.
And then think about what that does for people's confidence in public institutions.
Sure. Yeah.
Their willingness to call the police to solve a problem. I mean, we have a ton of guns in this country, right? If it doesn't do any good to call the police, what are people going to do to solve their own problems?
Yeah. And some of them have done just that, obviously.
Yeah.
Well, back to police for a second. Of course, as you pick up St. Albans Town on July 1st, you'll be out of Highgate. And probably just as well. It sounds like you'll have plenty of business down here. Will there be different coverage? Of course, you had St. Albans Town years ago for a number of years. Will the coverage be decent? Is there going to be a different kind of patrol situation, coverage situation in the town, or you leave that to the police folks?
Yeah, that's further down into the chain of command for police than I like to go. I mean, generally speaking, the staffing structure is going to follow where the crime is, right?
Yeah,
So whether
makes
it's in the
sense.
city or when it's in the town,
Yeah,
that's where the emphasis will be.
yeah. That makes sense. Wow, so that's a big, and again, just to, for folks who've been in a cave and haven't picked up on this, again, in city and St. Albans Town, St. Albans City, St. Albans Town, splitting, the police budget is split 50-50.
50-50, yeah.
Right. And water sewer rates are now, town residents will be treated like city residents, the affiliation fee's gone, so.
The affiliation fee is gone,
Okay.
yeah.
And rates, will they be equal? Is there still a difference with rates?
There's still a difference with rates. It's
Huh.
I mean, that's sort of baked into it, and has been forever, right?
Okay.
The issue was the affiliation fee
That
itself.
was a big sticking point.
Yeah, and the ability to access it,
Right.
right? And so there's some reasons, why that usage rate is different. Relates to the
Yeah.
cities passing the bonds and holding the debt and all that.
Right.
The cost to deliver it in an outlying area versus a
Right.
compact area. But it's the affiliation fee that'll go away.
Right. And it sounds like that's played to, I sure don't hear hardly any critics. I talk to the town folks. Is anybody on your case about getting in with the city? As they say, we just don't hear any criticism. Sounds
Yeah.
like a long time coming.
It was a long time
Boy,
coming.
will there be any event? Sounds like it might be worth having some event
Yeah.
on July 1st. Is that, anybody thought about that?
We haven't. I think we're
It's
kind of
right around Bay Day. Maybe you can throw
Yeah,
something into Bay Day.
for sure. I think most folks are just
Happy
eager to
it's
get the
finally
work
happening.
done. And yeah.
I think, Dominic, when I think of you, your long tenure, easy to think of TIFs and your good friend Doug Hoffer, but anyway, I'm kidding. But tax increment financing. But when you talk about being a project guy, boy, without TIFs, you think you might have been out of here years ago? That's certainly been a huge part of, I think, what you've went up to.
Yeah.
And it's certainly been a key part of revitalizing downtown.
TIF is the greatest. It's the most transformative tool that we have in Vermont.
When did that show, was that here before you came? I don't think I had ever
No.
heard of it. Think of it so associated with St. Albans, and I know other folks, Rutland, I think has been checking in. I'm here in Newport,
Yeah.
giving it some thought now.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the ideas that I've been kicking around is, and it relates policy ideas. It relates to our two crises right now. Right now, we have a housing crisis and we
Yeah.
have an education fund crisis.
Boy, that was on my
and-
agenda too, really.
And I'm a firm believer in never waste a crisis because, and where that saying comes from is in a crisis, sort of like the town wastewater police agreement, people are more willing to tolerate solutions that they otherwise wouldn't have been. Those
interesting.
rigid boundaries break down. And the state of Vermont, led by the state auditor, has been hostile to tax increment financing
From day one.
for a long time.
And when did that start? Was that happening when you were with VLCT still, or was that later than that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just Mr. Hoffer. It goes back to the
Sure.
office, and it's been there a long time. And
Yeah, I'm sorry, my good friend Vince Saluzzi, who's still the state's attorney. I don't know if you know Vince.
I do.
Probably
yeah,
do.
Yeah.
In Essex County. Vince is an old friend of mine from
Yeah.
Free Press reporting days. But of course, he ran against Doug Hoffer when Doug was first elected. And I think Vince thought he was going to win that race and blames the R by his name. But anyway, didn't happen. He's still doing his state's attorney thing.
For sure.
So the auditors have just always been hostile. Just don't buy into this.
Yeah,
And again,
I
I
mean,
guess I shouldn't even be talking about this at all, but I guess the line is, hey, that a lot of those things would have happened without tax increment financing. Is that the big thing they fall back on?
So where you stand depends on where you sit.
Right.
And as you're the state auditor, you don't care whether it happens in St. Albans or Milton.
Yeah.
And the belief has always been that communities can never prove
Right.
that it wouldn't have happened otherwise. Which is a little bit like proving a negative. It
Yeah.
is that, and
Yeah.
so my take is, does anybody who's lived in Vermont for the last 30 years
Yeah.
really think that the redevelopment that happened in Winooski, Vermont,
Yeah.
and the redevelopment that happened in St. Albans, Vermont,
Yeah.
could have happened without a powerful tool like TIF.
Yeah.
When I was first became the city manager,
You sure don't think that.
somebody said to me, I was at a Rotary Club meeting and I was championing the benefits of St. Albans, and somebody raised their hand and said, do you realize that St. Albans St. Albans City is the Winooski of Franklin County,
Interesting.
right? And they meant that as a slur, right?
Interesting.
And what we've seen and I'm going to bring this back to the Ed Fund in a minute. What we've seen over the last decades is Winooski has added, I believe, $100 million to their tax base.
Wow.
Put another way, Winooski has added $100 million to the statewide grand list. St. Albans has added 70,
Really?
and we're on track to hit $1 million in the next few years if the developments land the way we hope they will. Right.
Wow.
So, round numbers, 2 communities who were widely disparaged as sources of divestment, not investment, are looking at nearly $200 million in tax-based growth that everybody else in the state can use via the Ed Fund. So that's the answer. One of the answers, I think, to the problem we have facing the education fund and housing.
What a huge issue.
Let's right now, to get a TIF, you have to be willing to deal with the audit from the state auditor, and it's a very complex program. You need a lot of professional staff.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be that way.
No.
We could, and there's a limited number of them.
Yeah.
We could keep all the robustness.
This is running out, is it not, in a year or two, or?
St. Albans was running out, but we've issued our debt. But the number of TIFs statewide are limited under state statute.
Right.
I think we ought to create, instead of creating a hurdle to make it a bar you have to get over to have a TIF.
Yeah.
I think we want to encourage communities to have a TIF for housing projects. So projects that are majority housing, some threshold, 75%, let's say. Then you have a right to have a tax increment finance district. And what you could do with that is communities could buy the land, build the infrastructure that facilitates the type of housing that their community envisions, and then have the developers come in and build that housing. We'd knock 30% off the cost of housing, right?
Yeah, really.
And then we'd be simultaneously growing our school-age population and our statewide tax base that we can use to service the schools.
What's the stat I hear? I hear like Vermont ideally could use another 50,000 housing units or something.
Yeah, demand
tens of thousands.
And so that's where we have to. That's the never waste a crisis bit. For us to respond to that, we have to look in the eye Vermonters' implicit bias against development.
Yeah.
Right? And many Vermonters can get on board with development if it's within our designated centers.
Yeah.
Well, you can't do development in our designated centers unless you have tax increment financing.
No.
So we could literally, if the legislature said unlimited TIFs for housing projects, we could unleash a tool that would have our cities growing, our designated growth centers, not just existing town centers, but new town centers, all the areas we want to have growth, growing for housing, and knock 30% off the price of housing.
You obviously have talked to folks. Is there any movement on what you're talking about? Is this conceivable?
I think we're, right now, we're looking at traditional tools of reform.
Yeah.
Right now, we're saying, well, it's a regulatory problem. It's a little bit of a regulatory problem, but I'm involved in a lot of real estate deals. It's a financial problem, more often than a regulatory problem. And so I think regulations, with all due respect to all the hard work that's been done to loosen them, most of which I support, it's a bit of a red herring.
That's just not getting.
It's not where the action is, right? Doesn't mean it's not worth doing, but it's not going to be transformative, right? And Vermonters, we have a hard time making. Vermonters don't believe in developers. They're hostile to developers. They think developers are, the so-called rape and pillage the land, right? And that developers are doing it all with their own money because they got money to burn. Most developers I know are going to the bank. And the problem that we have right now, it's basic market failure. The communities and then in aggregate the state need a certain type of housing right now. It's housing for, I call it workforce housing. It's for most people, right?
Yeah.
Most people who have jobs and, the so-called middle class, right?
Yeah.
That's what nobody can afford to build
Yeah.
because there's a market failure. So they build on either end of that because that's where you can make money.
Yeah. Wow.
And there's plenty of land and there's plenty of capital. But the capital costs twice of what it needs to cost to make a deal happen, and we've got private developers. We're asking them to put in all the infrastructure, and then the communities are just going to sit back and tax it. Whereas if we put in the infrastructure, we can still tax it, but then the projects would happen. The thing that people forget is, to get a development project to happen, you got to beat the stock market. And developers do real estate projects because they're more fun than the stock market. And there's the opportunity over the long haul to make more money at it. So that's what we got to beat. And until we can offer returns by lowering the cost of development, they're never going to respond.
Yeah. You're not holding your breath on this. How do you see any movement? Have you got any hope that things will get better?
I spent a lot of time on lobbying issues when I was working in Montpelier, and what I like about being a city manager is I like being able to do projects and make things work on the ground. So I'm not close enough to render a professional, or opinion on what the prospects are.
I assume whenever you're talking to local legislators or anybody, you talk about stuff like this.
We absolutely talk about it. And I'm saying a voice from the trenches is our problem is transactional. It's not regulatory.
Interesting. One question I got when you spoke at the Ollie lecture a few months ago.
Yeah.
A woman next to me, and you certainly focused on tax increment financing, TIFs a lot. The woman kind of said, Richard, a good question for Dominic. TIF sounds like a good thing, but isn't that hurting the education fund amidst our crisis? Isn't that it's taking some money out of the ed fund? Is that not you see the benefits, I assume, way, being much greater than that? I guess you could say would be a negative, or?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I thought it was a good question. I said, boy, I think that is a good question.
So the education fund is most of our tax bill.
Yeah, about good three-quarters or so.
Yeah. So
Maybe more.
A typical tax bill of $4,000, $3,000 of it's going to school. TIF
Sure,
takes
municipal officials like you, I try to mention that when I'm talking to typically municipal officials. They like to make that point. Don't hang us for your tax bill. Don't hang us for much of that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So when you form a tax increment finance district, that $3,000 that was going to the school, we never touch that. The only thing that we touch is the increment that comes in on
later
top
on.
of that.
Okay.
That's the I in tax increment finance. So to call it an original taxable value, we never touch what's there now.
Okay.
And what we get to take is 75-80% of
the future growth.
And it can only be used to service the infrastructure that was necessary to create that increment. So
pretty specific.
And that's, so the policy case I make in response to that question is the ed fund is not in a position to create tax base. It's only in a position to utilize it. So you need somebody who's in a position to create tax base. And that's what I've been doing for, the last 15 years is expanding the tax base. And, the beauty of TIF is you can do it without raising anybody's existing taxes, and only utilizing the increment, what comes in as a direct result from your development. And it's I call it crowdsourcing through the ballot box. It's incredibly democratic, right? You know, there isn't anything that we've done in the city over the last 15 years that the voters haven't had a chance to say yes to.
And they've said yes to every
2 to 3 to 1. Yeah, every time. Yeah. So,
and that has to come before voters. I mean,
has to come before. There's no other way to do it, right? So, you know, that's the strength of the system, and that's why I think we ought to have unlimited TIFs in the state, because
do other states have TIFs? I had never even heard of it.
A lot of states have TIFs.
Yeah.
You know, it's the most powerful, most common economic development tool there is.
Huh.
Few other states don't have the education fund. They don't have the sharing provisions.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it complex.
Well, that sounds like to me the big issue. I mean, how there's some huge issues, but boy, the education funding situation, especially with the last town meeting, has really come into the fore.
It's really complex, you know, and
good luck. I finally had Bill Kimball had the school super on.
Yeah.
Far be it for me to tell anybody anything about this.
But no, you know, look at nobody.
Maple Run had its closest budget. They had for the first time had a very close budget vote this time around.
Yeah.
They did get approval.
We're not gonna nip and tuck our way out of this by closing a few small schools here and there. That probably needs to happen, but you know, look at what happened to Jeb Spalding when he tried that, right? So, you know, people don't like closing schools.
Right. Yeah, sounds like Jeb kind of knew what was coming down the pike pretty well.
Yeah. So, you know, we in Vermont, where we have a pretty large appetite for human-based social services and taking care of communities in our local communities, you know, which is like, you know, a pretty progressive vision, if you will, small p. The only way to respond to that, I think, is to grow the size of the pie. That's the only way out of this, is to grow the pie. And the only way to grow the pie is through tax increment financing, because Vermont's a really tough place to do business. And it's an even tougher place to own a house. And it's, you know, I believe in a vision where it's the community itself that should take take the bull by the reins, take the horse by the reins, whatever the phrase is, and step up to this problem, because it's so gosh darn democratic, right? It's the community that has the most to win, the community that has the most to lose. And if we can empower them through TIF to create housing and grow, and they have the choice to say yes or no in a ballot, that's a huge win.
And any other community, had there been some negative votes on TIFs in other communities? Do you probably pay some attention to that? I don't.
Yeah, I've never seen a TIF vote go down. I haven't looked at it closely, but.
And Milton's been dealing with this. I think Doug Hoffer had some issues with Milton or Burlington also, maybe with every town. Is he?
Yeah, you know, TIF has been. The TIF rules and the TIF body of law that applies to TIF has kind of been a death by 1,000 cuts. You know, I'll give you a really good example. You know, there's a provision in there that you need to disclose to the voters how much you're going to spend on related costs of the infrastructure, right? So if you have $1 million project, you might say we're going to spend of that $1 million, we're going to spend $200,000 on related costs. And related costs is your soft costs, right? So your engineers and well, sometimes your related costs and TIF's paying $1 million out of that project, but the project itself is actually, you know, $7 million, right? So sometimes you might spend a little bit more on a lawyer or on an engineer or on design, right? Sometimes you might spend a little bit less. What I think the voters care about is, did you go over the $1 million? But TIF is set up to say, nope, you can only, you know, you have to specify within this like rigid line item budget that you're only going to spend 200. And if you decide that you need to spend more than 200 on related costs, then you got to go back to a state board and get permission. And if you fail to do any of those, then the state auditor is going to come in and say, and have a headline and issue a press release that said you unlawfully spent TIF funds.
Interesting. All right. So some city staff, there's some city staff who are just totally focused on TIF.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
you're obviously a key guy, but you got other folks who are dealing with TIF big time.
yeah, I mean, we're all, there's three of us that are up to our eyeballs in
Really?
TIF, and St. Albans has made greater use of TIF than any other community.
Is that right?
Because our needs were so great. I mean, you remember what it was like,
Hey, I've been around for, don't hate to say, but about half a century.
Yeah.
Started in Enosburg with the County Courier, but moved to St. Albans circa 1983 or so, and I can remember the grief. My friends from like Enosburg, Montgomery.
Yeah.
Richard, you're moving to St. Albans? Are you serious?
Yeah.
I mean, it was, right. Yeah, I blew into town in 75 right after the Paul Lawrence affair, but
Oh, wow.
even 10 years later, yeah, no, it was a tough time. I mean,
Yeah.
my friends couldn't believe I was moving to St. Albans.
Yeah, for sure.
Proud to say I'm now a longtime city resident. The place has treated me very well.
And now, one of the measures of success, I think, is your common level of appraisal. Right,
Yeah,
the city has
good
a
old
very
CLAs.
very high CLA.
And the city started, we were
Yeah.
talking, starting on a reappraisal process, Dominic, as we speak.
As we
It's-
speak, yeah.
Yeah.
It should take about a year.
Yeah.
But we have a CLA because we've been discovered.
Yeah.
A lot of people are moving here,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So,
I was going to ask you, with Burlington getting beat up a bit with just the police situation, I've got some of my friends up here who literally boycott the place. They will not go near Burlington, will
I hear
not
that a
spend
lot.
a cent there and stuff. So funny, I listen to a lot of CJD, Montreal radio, and it's funny, Montreal was getting beat up big time a couple days ago, and I was just up at the airport, horrible place to go to. But I also got bagels downtown, but just the construction, the city, just ongoing construction. God knows how these businesses hang in there.
Yeah.
But it was funny on there, Aaron Rand, longtime Montreal radio guy, was just soliciting calls, and it was funny, one call said, hey, I went to Burlington last week, and I'm never going to downtown Montreal again, but Burlington was great, so I guess it's all kind of relative.
It's all relative, right? I mean, Burlington.
But no, St. Albans has come a long way.
And for all of its challenges, Burlington has,
I still like that. I think it's still a decent place.
and it's got its fundamentals are, any community would die for their fundamentals to have a lake and a
Yeah.
college, right?
It still gets a lot of good words when you see most livable cities and
Yeah.
stuff. I think my friends get overreact a little bit, but the police issue, they've obviously had some, tough issues also.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's the politics, So
Mentioning TIF, I guess I'd be remiss. I guess kind of the two key businesses, Viatra, am I mispronouncing?
Beatrice,
Beatrice,
Yeah.
and the St. Albans Co-op Dairy Farmers of America, their expansions were a huge key, were they not, to TIF kind of getting some legs in St. Albans?
yeah.
And I'm sure there are other folks too.
They were some of the first ones who,
Yeah.
who were, and so our read of the wind on the water, if you will, was Beatrice, then Milan was going to be doing a project, and if we could create a tax increment finance district, we could capture that growth and use it to do other projects.
And that led to the downtown
It led to the downtown
parking garage, I guess, hotel.
First, it was the downtown core, which was the state office building and the hotel.
Yeah.
And the streetscape project on Lake Street that went along with it. And then it was, that was the first main project. Ace Hardware, of course, came before that, and that sort of teed up the second project. Ace was the first one where we could see, the city can participate in a development process and
And the old public-private partnership.
public-private partnerships, yeah.
And now, of course, from ACE, you've got another in the works with, of course, that does, one question that pops into mind when you do that, and Boy, who doesn't like a good, solid downtown hardware store?
Yeah.
I can only assume when the city gets involved with something like that, some other folks who are not getting involved in the city are saying, hey, why not us? I can only assume you run into that once in a while.
We definitely hear that, and I say a couple of things.
Yeah.
Bring me a deal.
Yeah. You'll listen to anybody.
We'll listen to anything. That's the first thing. The second thing is our funds are whether it's TIF or whether it's the ARPA funds, which we've been using most recently.
Yeah.
They're catalytic and they're transformative. It's not welfare, right? And so a lot of businesses who are hitting hard times come to us and say, will you help me? And we have some smaller programs that's available for that.
Yeah.
But the big money is for transformative projects that, in our view, it's catalytic, and there's nothing worse, no matter what your business is, there's nothing worse than a vacant storefront across the street. It's
Yeah.
better to have somebody across the street selling the same darn thing than to have a vacant storefront.
Yeah.
There's a reason why car dealers and fast food restaurants,
Yeah.
the best retailers in the country, all locate together.
Yeah. Interesting. And speaking of TIF, with, I guess, voters having most recently approved this, a big potential kind of housing project right near City Hall.
Yeah,
Is that looking like, would that be the last TIF project at this point anyway?
that's the last TIF
That's
project.
the last one.
Yes.
How's that? That sounds like not the easiest project to pull together. How's that looking?
It's getting there. We're having conversations with surrounding property owners to tie up the last bits of site control.
And this is housing, buying some property right near City Hall for housing.
Yeah, we own the Bellevue building, which is the heart of it, and the movie theater.
And
Which,
thank you for keeping
Yeah,
a movie
yeah.
theater in town. I mean, I mentioned to people, it's unbelievable to me that a place as small as St. Albans still has a downtown theater.
right?
So
Yeah,
thanks for me for that.
yeah.
And
You're
I know
welcome.
Kelly Viens and company have worked real hard on that place.
They're doing a great job. Kelly's really good at working with young employees and helping to sort of deal with sort of the basic business functions, right? She's done it for years with the rec department, and
Yeah,
movies are just a different type of recreation.
yeah,
And then the housing project, and back of that, the city's adopted a goal. We want to do 200 housing units in the next 5 years.
wow.
And
How many would be involved in that project? About
about, I forget what it shows, but 80 something,
wow.
right? And
So about almost half of that, the 200.
yeah, the rest of them are at Fonda, former
Okay.
Fonda.
In fact, site work is, as I go by there every day, some site work going on with Cathedral Square now.
Yeah, and so Fonda's a good example of what it takes to do housing development, because Cathedral Square, which is senior housing, is doing 30-odd units of senior housing right now as we speak.
Hope to do Highgate
then,
too. Sounds like those folks have a very, very good reputation.
They got a great reputation and a great business model. The other 3 acres we've envisioned for market rate workforce housing that is priced to service your average person in the county making average wages.
And what would a rent for that person be these days? Talking like 1,500 or something, or am I way off on that?
Now, generally, market rate's $1,200 a bedroom right
About
now.
1,200 a bedroom.
So
Interesting.
whether that's affordable or not is a whole broader discussion.
Yeah.
But that's the market right now, right?
Is that right? 1,200 a bedroom.
and I
Interesting.
the best evidence of whether it's affordable or not is that's what apartments are renting for,
Yeah.
right? And so, but even with that price,
Yeah.
even with free land offered by the city,
Yeah.
we have had a hard time getting developers interested in that project because of the cost of capital. And so, that project works when they can borrow money at 3%. It doesn't work when they can borrow at 7%.
Yeah.
And so that's why I say all of this other reforms,
Yeah.
this is a transactional business problem, not a regulatory problem.
Yeah.
So what the city's done is we've partnered with Vermont Housing Finance Agency to secure $10 million in low-cost financing for the project. So we're going to be out to bid in the next week or so, recruiting developers to build, 90 or so units there. With all the infrastructure in place, all you have to do, again, that's back to that driving down the cost.
Yeah.
All you have to build is the building, and here's about half the money you're going to need in debt that is half the cost of what you could borrow on the open market.
Oh,
We'll see if it works. That's how you do housing in Vermont.
yeah.
And it's a combination of TIF. It's a combination of communities accepting and absorbing risk, and it's a combination of making low-cost financing available,
Yeah.
all of which can be done anywhere in the state, and it has nothing to do with regulating.
Interesting. And speaking of TIF, just the city's indebtedness, TIF-related, you're comfortable with that? You think the city's, as we're close to ending a fiscal year, city at this point in decent shape fiscally?
Yeah. The city's in great shape fiscally. We're very comfortable with the debt. Imagine if I'm trying to think of an analogy here, right? Imagine if your dad said, or your parents said, Dominic, you can borrow as much as you want for the next 20 years.
Yeah.
And I will service the debt on 75% of it.
Yeah.
But at the end of it, at the end of the 20 years, you're on your own thereafter. You would borrow like crazy and try to set yourself up for the next 30 years after that first 20.
Interesting.
And that's what TIF is about,
Yeah.
So, if you don't arrive at the end of your tax income and finance period thoroughly exhausted, having left it all on the field, you've wasted an opportunity.
Yeah.
So that we feel very good about.
Okay. Down to about just under 3 minutes. Passport agency, are you hoping that St. Albans will keep the passport agency, or hard to say?
We're taking steps to try to keep them.
I think the mayor thought that some folks were maybe trying to just kind of slide that out of town at some point with nobody saying much. That certainly didn't happen.
Yeah, we're in close contact with the congressional delegation. There's a bid process through the General Services Administration that's out now, and we're participating in that.
You'd love to get them down at the old Gil Tabor project complex, maybe?
Yeah, that's one of one of three sites that we're looking at in the city. The city's got a pretty good track record of working to help local business retain and expand. That's what we did with Milan. That's what we did with the railroad.
Yeah.
We'd love to do the same with the passport agency.
Yeah.
The challenge there is, the GSA process is specifically designed to prevent political influence, right?
Yeah.
And there's an awful lot there's a huge vacancy in Chittenden County of office space.
Yeah.
But
nothing happening overnight. We're talking a few years for this to play out, probably, or hard to say?
It depends. Their formal selection process has a pretty tight timeline on it, 18 to 24 months.
Yeah.
But I've been at this, for 15 years now, and there's always a federal agency saying, I'm on my way out of town. and I only, so it always takes a while.
Sounds like it's been a good thing for St. Albans just to have more traffic around here, obviously. So good luck with that.
We're doing everything we can to keep it, and their workforce is very much in lockstep with the city. None of them want to move to Chittenden County.
Yeah.
And in an era of chronic unemployment, paying attention to your workforce is an important thing.
Oh, down to half a minute. I'm a railroad guy here in the railroad city. I'll end with any chance you think in my lifetime I might be able to get on the Amtrak Vermonter and get to Montreal.
There's a chance.
You're not don't hold my breath on that, huh?
That's above my pay grade. It literally takes an act of Congress.
Sounds like it's getting a little just here.
The Greyhound just announced, though, that they've resumed service.
I wanted to ask you about Jim Levy. I know has been working hard on that, I think, for a while.
Yeah, Jim Levy, we ought to, I say this tongue-in-cheek and hope he doesn't take me serious. We ought to put a statue up to him on Main Street.
That's right. So bus service coming back at some point?
It's back. It'll be here next month.
Oh, that's great. Hey, on that note, Many thanks to Dominic Cloud, the longtime St. Albans City Manager, for jumping on. Hope to see you in the not-too-distant future.
Thank you, Richard.
And thank you very much. And our key guy, Alan Cunningham, our producer. Again, thanks for watching us. We appreciate it here on Northwest Access TV. I'm Richard Cowperthwait. See you next time.